issues on microdata in the context of productivity analysis and enterprises, and use macrodata for GVC job type effects as well. So it's an interesting dimension of work's being evolved there. He's going to be presenting today on behalf of Martin Lupis, who unfortunately couldn't be here. And so the background paper that we presented by Oscar was Martin's, but thankfully we have a very good stand-in, and perhaps he'll demonstrate to Ron how stand-ins can or should be done. So without further ado, Oscar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for this introduction. Indeed, I will present the departing of Martin, and of course, if something would go wrong, it would be due to my interpretation of his paper. What will be the structure of my presentation? First, I will tell something about why we will have a look at enterprises and not at countries and sectors. I will give like a part of a wish list for the information that we would like to have in an ideal world that maybe does not exist. Martin had a look at what of this wish list is already available in the European statistical system, and I will conclude and make some suggestion for a way forward. Now, measuring trade and economic globalization. Of course, before going here, I had a look at trade between Mexico and the Netherlands. And it might be not very surprising that this is almost zero, because countries do not trade, enterprises do trade. Therefore, we have to look at those enterprises. Now, understanding a multinational is necessary because we all know that policymakers, they like write the scripts, and the multinationals are the actors that probably have their own interpretation. Maybe not exactly as the policymakers would have liked to. Martin also mentioned, he did not dare to write it down, that in his opinion probably the multinationals would have more lobbying power at the G20 than the national parliaments. Because those multinationals, they influence almost everything. Employment standards, environmental standards, everything. And not only in their own enterprises, but also something in an enterprise they might control. Now, part of a wish list, or as somebody else would have said, I have a dream, we would like to have some owner structures, maybe some governance structures where there is no ownership involved, but as Ivo just mentioned, you have economic control. It can be also very useful. There are also, we would like to have all those financial transactions because they might give us a lead on those structures. Follow the money and you will know what is happening in the world. And in the end, if one would get lucky, one would see who's controlling whom, both in an official way that you can see immediately. I am a very important multinational and I have a subsidiary somewhere else. Or the non-official way, I am a multinational, I say to some contractor abroad what he or she has to do, and then I have quite some control over that as well. And of course, follow the money, who's paying whom. Now, if we could open up that black box of a multinational, it would seem like the perfect gift to national statistical institutes. And finally, we would know and understand everything. What is happening in this world? What is happening? How is everything structured? And how can we use that for our statistics? And those statistics can be used to understand this world better, to make the policy makers happy, and then we are also happy. The problem is, if we open up that black box, it might turn out to be a box of Pandora. For those who are not familiar with the mythology, the box of Pandora was like big secret, and when they finally opened it, against all warnings, all kinds of ugly things came out. And here, if we would open up a multinational, indeed also many things we do not like will appear. You have the transfer pricing, you have the intellectual property pricing, all kinds of things to maximize profits. Other people might say to minimize the tax burden, but it is an ugly way of saying it, and I will not do so. So, I think for the NSIs, if we would open up that box of Pandora, we might come to the conclusion that we are a little bit doomed. It's not my quote. It has been used more often by people working in national accounts because we have those big problems. As Nadim put it this morning, we are still trying with our old disconnected statistics to describe an integrated and interconnected world. And that is, of course, rather difficult. Okay, here there was, when I was preparing this presentation, I had, of course, discussion with Martin, and here we had some difference of opinion. In the original presentation, I switched relations and transactions, and Martin convinced me that it would be better to start with the transactions, because it's one way to get at those relations, how to get that global production, how to get that governance, how to put it into numbers. And you can start with very nice theory and trying to map everything, but it's very difficult and one will not manage. So he said to me, look at the transactions. What are the transactions? That are some exchanges, probably deliveries of goods and services, and then some money will be involved. If you see that, then the world will be much clearer. Then you will see what the relations, the general connections between all those enterprises and institutions, persons, what they will be like. First follow the money, then you will see what the world will look like. Now, of course, we would like to know everything, but we do not yet have everything. So the logical approach of Martin was to see what is available, what do we already have. And he started looking at the European statistical system, because that is the information that is at hand and that is also existing in most European countries. So as far as owner structures are concerned, there is a big project, European Group Register, where they have the enterprises and they map everything so that you can see what is going there. Now, other relations, well, not that clear. Transactions, also not very clear. So the approach was rather simple. Let's start with an existing project. There is an Eurostat project. It's called Micro Data Linking Project. What is happening over there is that a lot of information, existing information, is integrated. There would be information from the business register, how many people are there in an enterprise, the information about the activity that is performed there. There would be information from the structural business statistics, like the turnover. They would add something about international trade, and some other sources were added as well to get as much information on the level of the enterprise as possible. So this was a start. Then they continued and they created like a gross list of relations and transactions and had a look at it. Can it be used? Can it not be used? How to order all this information. Now, the results were that this very big project had many, many variables, like almost 2,000. And of course, many of them were not related to relations at all, but 1/3 was. And as we will see in the next slide, most of the information by far is in the Global Value Chain Survey, which is a new survey carried out by a few European countries. So it's not yet mandatory. It will be probably in a few years' time. And The other information was found mostly in the Community Investment Survey, Innovation Survey, the Community Innovation Survey, the R&D Survey, and the Structural Business Statistics surveys. And those are mandatory, so those can be used by every European country to see those relations. Well, first of the things that they did was to order all this information. What is the nature and the direction of the relation? Here I put a very small table. In the paper that is available you will see a much bigger table, and it gives an impression of what is there. There is information on control, there is information on business functions, there is information on innovation, and sometimes the nature of the relation is like an inward one, sometimes it's going out. And what is important to see here is that the Global Value Chain Survey is most, by far, giving most relations. And for example, what is coming out of the Community Innovation Survey would be cooperation in R&D. Then there are questions like, do you cooperate in research and development with an institution other than your own? It could be with a university or something like that. And that is put in the very next slide, the entities that are involved in those relations. Because if you have mapped, if you have found in your variables such a relation, then often the receiving or the sending party is known. Maybe not the exact actor, but some direction where this actor might be. Is it another enterprise? Is it a government? Is it, as I gave the example with the R&D, maybe it's a university? There is quite some information available on the person you are, or the entity that you are dealing with. Now, it looks, of course, nice, much tables, there is quite some information available, but the conclusion is also that there is still very much to wish for. If we go back to our wish list about information, in an ideal world we would have information about everything between individual entities. We would know that Apple in the United States is selling something to another enterprise in Mexico. That is something we would like to know. And unfortunately, we do not know. We do know something on aggregate level. At this moment, we would know that Apple is selling something to Mexico because there are some exports, but we have no idea to whom this is happening. And also, so on aggregate level, we would have something, not in individual level. For governance and control, we still do not have anything at all. For the owner structures, as I mentioned earlier, there is some progress, so that is good. Now, even if my conclusion would be there is still much to wish for, one can also have a look at like seeing this as a glass. Is the glass half full because we still found some very much information that might be quite useful because in the beginning we had nothing, or is it half empty because we still want so much to do? And that answer, I think, maybe depends more on the nature of the person who answered the question than on the reality. So what to do? We would like to do more, we would like to have more information, and how can we get there? Now, it was already mentioned this morning, possible directions might include big data. Big data sounds very nice. There are people who think it's the answer to every single question. And as Steve already mentioned, this is probably not true. You can get a lot out of it, but not everything. And Martin had some suggestions. He said, okay, we have the statistical institutes, we have the national banks. They have, in principle, all transactions between enterprises available at national level, and if we would be able to convince them to give us that data, we would have very much data. And of course, then one can do something. Another approach would be to use the VAT data. Every month there is an exchange of data. The other European countries would send their VAT data to the Netherlands, and every country does. We send it to them as well about the foreign transactions of trade, for example. So we would know that a given enterprise in the Netherlands has traded with trader A in Germany, trader B in Lithuania, and trader C in Bulgaria. We would have that information on VAT number basis, which is already something, and you can do some interesting analysis with that. Now, of course, there are some problems, because, again, there would be quite some data exchange, especially for the first one, and it is limited and restricted. Think of all the privacy rules that are there. Think that if we would like to build a real value chain, and then we would have to exchange information between countries very much, and many countries are a little bit reluctant to do so, because there is national law is prohibiting them from doing so. And so, as I said before, there are possibilities and also some problems, and again, one can say the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. Another solution would be to adapt the existing surveys or to make new ones. And this might be more promising. For example, you could add some questions about the top suppliers and top buyers of an enterprise. And that sounds quite burdensome, because if you have to do that for every single enterprise, it creates a lot of administrative burden. But as we are not interested in every single enterprise, nobody wants to know what is the top supplier of the little bakery where you go in the morning to get your croissant if you're living in France. We do not need that information. We only need to know what is happening at the big multinationals. So we would be able to focus on a small subset of the enterprises, and they would get some extra burden. That is true. The GVC survey is already a start in this direction, where maybe some extra questions could be added to answer our questions. Okay, this was the presentation. Thank you for your attention, and Nadim, the word is to you.
No, well, thank you very much. Well, I'll open the floor to questions. Fabienne?
Thank you, and thank you, Oscar, for this interesting presentation. I have had the pleasure of working with you and Martin for quite a few years in Statistics Netherlands, and I'm always happy to see that there's lots of new, innovative and creative things happening. And I was particularly interested in the explanation you gave about the difference between transactions and relationships. And to think about, let's look at the transactions first. Let's look at the data that we have in terms of trade, in terms of ownership, in terms of many other variables that you also mentioned in the table that you showed. Because with that information, we can start to build typologies in a very similar way as the first presentation in this afternoon was showing, which showed typologies of value chains, typologies of how enterprises organize themselves internationally. And this typology was very much theory-driven. This was based on the existing academic knowledge about how these types of activities are configured. And I was wondering if you are intending to use the table that you have produced and the list of variables that you collected on these very interesting topics to do some, basically some bottom-up analysis of different types of configurations. I can imagine some cluster analysis or other types of research that can uncover perhaps that we have something even more exotic than a factory-less goods producer amongst our midst that we haven't discovered yet. So I would be interested in learning to learn more about your plans in that direction. Thank you.
Well, at this moment, we are already using part of the list, of course, like control or which enterprises are exporting, which ones are not. So there is already quite some work in this direction being done. And we do have some plans to extend it a little bit because, of course, the policymakers, they always want something new. Now we are working on a project called ICT in Global Value Chains. So then we will use some information from the ICT surveys. If we will use everything, well, probably not. We will have to make a selection and then we will see what will turn out.
She?
I think the presentation present a very interesting perspective of the GVCs. Basically, right now, a lot of the current work is concentrated on cross-nation transactions. But this presentation raises the transaction among enterprises, especially this, in our terminology, we call it sometimes. Of course, if you have multinationals that also involve cross-country transactions. But within domestic territory, you will have the transaction among domestic firms, similar to transaction among domestic regions. What we call is domestic segment of the global value chain. That means a lot of firms didn't directly involve the trade by themselves, but they supply their service to the multinationals. So indirectly participate in the global value chain. But the difficulty right now is no official data on the inter-region, subnational, or inter-firm transactions. So right now, what we do is we fashion some kind of mathematical procedures, trying to using some proportional assumption, try to figure out these transactions. But if you have real data, that will be really interesting and can answer a lot of questions. My question is, particularly you mentioned you have the central bank have the transaction among the enterprises. But I believe even in that case, you only have the aggregate financial transactions. You might not have the classification because, for example, the firm will buy materials, they will buy services, they will buy energies, buy utilities. Is those data can be identified from the central bank's data? For my knowledge, you say, for the Chinese provincial transactions, what are the tax barrels? They have a taxation system. What do they have? They know each province's total transactions, but they don't know what the structure of the commodity or sector structure of the transactions. I don't know if it's the case in Netherlands or not. Thank you.
I think you address a very valid point. We would like to know much more information about what is happening into a country, because it would also help us to understand the global value chain. For example, if we would look at the small, medium enterprises, they probably do great service for the multinationals, but we do not yet see it in the data. And still, the policymakers, they say, okay, SMEs, what are they contributing to the exports? If they do not export themselves, it's okay, but if we would know they produce for the multinationals, they would still benefit from the exports, they would still be integrated in those global value chains, and that would be very good. But we do not know it. And we have another project running on right now where we try to make that kind of information using indeed the mathematical procedures you described. Now, the idea of Martin was not that you use like aggregated information, but that you would get access, and this is really not the wish list part, but the I have a dream part, that you would get access to every single transaction between enterprises. I would suppose we would be two Dutch enterprises. I buy something from you, you send me an invoice, I pay it, and that payment he would like to get from the banks. Now that I think, even if you would get it, it would be very difficult to use. So that's why I would call it more, I have a dream than the wish list. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two more questions. I mean, this is an issue that will also come up on Wednesday when we discuss the extended supply use tables. And I think we will see during that discussion that some countries do have some of the raw data available that allows these links to be done in a comprehensive, coherent way. And maybe from having that discussion, we'll be able to share some of the experiences so other countries can do it too. So the final two questions, it's first from Ron and then from Frederick. Okay, first from Frederick and last from Ron. Okay, all right. Frederick?
Thank you. I would begin by the word transaction, as Fabian also did, because transaction is very useful but very confusing word. I see at least two sense in transaction. Real relationship in services or products to work, okay? Information, product, service, okay? And on the other part, payments. So there is the use and the payments. If we want to understand something, I think that we have to concentrate on the payment. And I think that your intervention is insisting a lot on payments, as you did. But we have to know that the payment will not necessarily correspond to the so-called transaction. Maybe I can pay to Kaima what is used here, but which comes from a third country. I don't know. So there is we have to accept that because it could describe the reality. Second, you say central bank have all the data. We are currently in France trying to merge the data. And central bank, they don't have the data, so maybe in Netherlands, I don't know. The banks, they have the data of payments. Central banks, they have only some sample of the international payments data. Okay, they don't have the payments, all the payments between each enterprises. Those payments is banks. Central bank sometimes make balance of payments, and for balance of payments, sometimes they do it with all the payments, but in Europe, it is only with a sample of enterprises. And the problem is that the criteria to know if there is an international payment or not is very difficult to determine. So when we tried to rebuild the picture with the payment we have in the central bank and with the enterprise data that we have in National Statistical Institute, INSEE, there are a lot of hollow. We have no information of the payments for that legal unit of the enterprise group. And we don't know if it is because there is not payment because we don't know it. So it is a very important problem. But what I see in your intervention is maybe it could be connected to big data. It is that banks have a lot of data and maybe there is some field like agriculture field to have new data, new useful data. That's all.
Yes, thank you for sharing your experiences in France and the current situation over there. Indeed, I think that it would be Even if you get everything that you want, it's still very difficult to do something with it, because as you describe, there are some problems. Still, again, there it would be like the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. I think it would be completely impossible to do everything that we want, but I think that having that data available, you could still have quite some progress, and I think that is important. When you mentioned transaction, a confusing word, I do not completely agree, because I think that even the real relations, what is happening, you would have like a transfer from one party to another one, and one direction indeed would be like a real flow of knowledge, of goods, of services, things like that. And we will, if you would have the bank data available, you will not know what it is. You would only see the payment flow, and from that you would deduct that something has happened. But what it is, you do not know. You might think of something, you would probably see that this is like a manufacturer, then probably goods. This is something, a service provider, then probably services, but it's a little bit guessing. But I know that the people of national accounts never have problems with that. The second part, where is the information stored? Will that be in the central bank with the individual banks? I agree that it's most probably at the individual banks, that there you might get all your data, and sometimes there is something at the central bank as well. And well, through the central bank it's easier to get access to it because, well, they have the connections. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much again, Oscar. We're going to move now to the final two presentations, and they're going to be given by Luis de la Fuente. And Luis has kindly agreed to do both the presentations consecutively, and we'll take a round of questions at the end of the two presentations. Just by way of introduction, Luis works in the Directorate for Business Statistics at Eurostat, where he's been for 16 years. In the unit dealing specifically with structural business statistics and indeed global value chains, which has formed a specific part of their work program over the last few years. And he's the team leader responsible for FDI, ITSS, and FATS, and for the development work on GVCs more generally. Just as an additional, perhaps, introduction, for those of you from Europe, and indeed certainly within the Eurostat sphere of the world, you'll be aware that recently Eurostat had a sort of a reorganization or restructuring to bring together an awful lot of this, if you want, the stovepipes, as I referred to earlier on. So they have a new structure that really reflects, to some extent, the way that we'd like to see statistics being compiled in the future, recognizing the important links between business statistics and indeed trade statistics. And anyway, I'm not going to say too much more because I may steal your thunder.
With some pain.
Lots of pain, admittedly, but I mean, so.
I would say. Okay. Thank you very much, Nadim. So good afternoon. Maybe I would say also good evening for myself because I am 7 hours ahead. But I will try to be brief in these two presentations. I will touch upon two specific issues. The first one is already something that has been mentioned by Oscar before, which is the Eurogroup register. And then I will mention the issue which is quite attached to myself because I've been dealing with foreign direct investment statistics for a number of years, and something that we would like certainly to go on in this kind of specific data collection. And we'll also tackle the issue of real FDI that was somehow mentioned this morning. So let's start with the issue of the EGR, the Eurogroup register. So here you have an outline of my presentation. I will try to explain you what it is, how has it evolved, because now there's a number of years since we have this EGR going on. I will give you some more details, particularly on the variables that we store there, how the production cycle runs, and finally I will also touch upon the issue of how the information on the EGR is used and the potential use of this information in the framework of measuring, at least at aggregated level, the activities of multinational enterprises. I will finalize still by mentioning some limitations that we have at the moment. Well, I will not stop a lot on this issue of the background. The fundamental message I want to give you is that about 10 years ago we decided to develop in the European context, the foreign affiliate statistics, also following some international developments. And soon afterwards, we realized that the national business registers were not enough, or were not providing enough information for national data compilers to define the population frames for the national surveys. And the idea to set up this kind of Eurogroup register came into the picture, in order to, as it has been many times repeated in this forum, that the development of multinational enterprises actually represent a challenge for the way we collect the statistics. So, well, the AGR, the Eurogroup register, is the statistical register on multinational enterprise groups of the European communities. So actually, the way to develop this was through a legal basis. We have the opportunity at European level to define a statistical regulation that is compulsory for our member states, and obviously this is an advantage, as you will see later. So all 28 EU member states are part of the EGR, plus also some additional European countries, members of the EFTA, so we're talking about Switzerland, about Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And it is important also to mention that this is not a project limited to national statistical institutes and Eurostat, but also in recent years we have engaged also in this project national central banks, because also they are data compilers of some of the key statistics that we need. I mean, foreign direct investment, and in some cases, foreign affiliate statistics. So the NCBs, the national central banks, and the ECB are part of the project as well. So we normally say that we have two main goals in this project. First is to keep a record of these multinational groups present in Europe, and to store a number of characteristics and variables of those enterprise groups. So the units, the ownership relationships, some economic variables, for instance, activity, turnover, employment, and so on. But also, and probably this is the main use that we give so far to the EGR, is to provide to statisticians with a tool, with an infrastructure they can use, particularly to define sample frames for the statistical surveys, particularly in the case of foreign affiliate statistics. So the EGR was established back in 2009 through a legal basis, as I said. And so far we have produced 4 yearly cycles. So what we do is every year we prepare a frame, a population frame, which is stored in the EGR. And it covers so far years from 2008 to 2011. The EGR has evolved in the content, in the coverage, and we have moved from, at the beginning, about 5,000 main enterprise groups in Europe to, in the last cycle, about 10,000 main enterprise groups in Europe. And in terms of variables, and I will give you some more details immediately, we are now in the last cycle storing about 116 variables or characteristics, covering not only the group as itself, but also its constituent units. So we can somehow group the variables that we have in the EGR in 4 clusters. So we have first what we call demographic variables, where we have information related with the date of the operation of the groups or the establishment, or if it is the case, the cessation of the enterprise. Some information also on the way they consolidate the information. Then the typical economic variables, so the activity according to ISIC or NICE classification, the number of persons employed, turnover, and so on. Also, and this is important, all these ownership and control characteristics. So we have the ownership relationship between the different units in the group, information on the shares, and also we try also to collect information about what we call the global decision center. So in other terms, we can use the word ultimate controlling institutional unit of the group, and obviously where it resides. And final group refers to what we call a stratification, geographical, and other variables, where we have some information about the legal form, country codes of the different entities and so on. I will stop a little bit on the way these annual cycles are produced, because it's quite a burdensome process, and maybe some of the European countries present here are aware of it. So the first thing I have to say is that everything starts from purchasing commercial data. So we have two commercial data providers that gave us the data for all the different enterprise groups operating in Europe. Then what we do in Eurostat is that we put together these two commercial data sources, and we produce a combined or a consolidated set of information. And then we deliver this information to the national statistical institutes that they have to validate the legal units that we are giving to them and the relationships between them. They send back this information to Eurostat, and then we construct these enterprise groups. But the process is not ending there. We also send back the final enterprise groups. We actually divided the information by country, and they are asked to validate finally this information, including all economic variables and so on. So you can see it's a quite lengthy and burdensome procedure. And also it involves the exchange of information between countries, because obviously they are provided with information related to their countries that may be also related to others. So actually in the legal basis I mentioned before, there is a clause that allows this exchange of confidential microdata. Otherwise it would have not been possible, because confidentiality is an issue that is quite important in terms of not releasing information. So this is how it is produced so far, but we are now, or the colleagues dealing with the EGR in Eurostat are now working in what they call version 2.0, which tries to somehow tackle problems that we have found in the last cycles. And first of all, we want to reduce the dependency on commercial sources. We see that it won't be possible to completely get rid of this, but we want to reduce this as much as possible. And the way to do this is to use NSI's information and business register information as a source of primary data for the EGR. We have now a number of years in running this process, and we think that we have at national level enough experience to be the primary data source for the EGR. So the idea is that this information will come to the infrastructure, and the EGR will be able to construct these group relationships. And then the issue is that this process of verification will have less iterations, and therefore we will have less burden on the entire process. Well, this picture is trying to give you a kind of more, let's say, picturesque way of showing the way the new productions and validation process will take over in the EGR. In terms of the use of the information in the EGR, I have to say first that this is, for the time being, reduced to the European statistical system context. I mean, the information is used only within this system. We have this issue of safeguarding the statistical confidentiality, so the information is not going out, let's say, the European statistical community. But what we have realized, even if there is this limitation, that the National Statistical Institute and also the central banks are using more and more the information in the EGR. Obviously, there are two potential ways to continue in a more profound use of the EGR data. One is obviously from the statistical point of view, so to give the data in the EGR more uses for statistical purposes. But then another issue is to somehow disseminate or release purely EGR products that can be disseminated openly. And in that regard, we have been thinking already about which kind of measurement this information can produce for analytical purposes. So we have first this issue of measuring the economic impact of globalization in the EU countries. So we can extract information from the EGR about the percentage of enterprises in enterprise groups by country, or the share of employment in enterprises belonging to enterprise groups by country as well. On the other side, we can also measure global economic impact of European enterprises groups in terms of employment or in terms of countries where the enterprise group is acting, and also globalization and diversification in EU countries. So we may, for instance, look into the different activities which are performed within the group. So just to give you an example, a couple of examples, here this chart is showing the European group's contribution to global employment. So this is actually the total employment of the enterprise groups in the EGR classified according to the country where the global decision center is placed. So that is the reason why you have Germany, France, and the UK as the biggest contributors. And also, this is showing the time evolution of employment since 2010, 11, and 12, where you can see that enterprise groups in Europe have shown a positive evolution, even if it was the end of the crisis period. So you can see that enterprise groups have been able still to, at global level, create employment in these difficult years. This is another way to present the information, but looking also into the relative importance of this employment evolution, where you can see that enterprise groups with global decision centers placed in Switzerland, Sweden, and the Czech Republic have been those who have been able to create more employment in this period. So, final slide on the EGR is related to the fact that still there are limitations in the approach. Obviously, the EGR is limited to those enterprises with at least one affiliate in one European country, so we are not covering the entire world, obviously. And also an issue that is raising some concerns at the moment, which is the quality of the information there. Actually, I know that my colleagues are developing a specific quality assessment process in order to tackle some of the problems that has been identified recently. And here they have identified a couple of basic problems, related to the sources of information. One is what they call intrinsic errors of some variables, so they are missing information, there are wrong codification, there is a lack of updated data, which is also linked to the fact that enterprise groups are live creatures. So they don't remain without any change, but they obviously are modifying constantly their structures. And the second group of problems relates to the use of different sources which are inconsistent. So we may find that there are situations where there is a duplication of legal units, or there is not enough identification of the units, or inconsistent treatment across different data sources that does not allow to construct properly the structure of the groups. Okay, so that's all related to the enterprise groups. Should I continue?
Fair that you have 2 rounds of applause for 2 presentations. And now we can move to the second one.
Okay. Well, second one will be certainly shorter. If I can get it. The next one. Next presentation. The FDI. Yeah, that one. So as I said at the beginning, I will tackle this very specific point, which is one of the things that in the world of the FDI compilers is, at least from the point of view of the kind of user requests that we received in Eurostat are giving us some trouble, because we are not able so far to respond to this request. So the idea is that I will basically explain the situation, the problem in terms of the different measurements of FDI. We have already the methodological framework developed in the manual, so it's not a problem, as I will explain. Still, there is some data available. I will even show some examples. I will mention what are the user needs and the challenges and opportunities that it's offering to us. And I will finalize by mentioning my idea that what the role of the Friends of the Chair could be in this issue. Well, as you know, in the new manuals in BPN 6 and the benchmark definition 4, there are two ways now, or two principles to present foreign direct investment statistics. One is the asset liability, which goes actually in line with the balance of payments. And the other one is the directional principle, or even the extended directional principle, as it is called now. But even within the directional principle, there are two possibilities to collect and to present the information. This is nothing new. I mean, it was already in the past. But now, with all these activities of the multinational enterprise groups, the use of these SPEs, the use of countries where they are settled down certain activities for financial or tax reasons, so it has become more evident that there is another, and I wouldn't say that we are trying to measure real FDI, but we are somehow measuring another reality of FDI, because at some point in time, I mean, the information by immediate counterpart country or by immediate investor is also valid information that may give us some information. But I think the point is we need to somehow complement with the information by immediate host country or immediate investing country. So actually the immediate host country is actually making reference to the outward FDI, while immediate investing country is making reference to inward FDI. And we have to compare this with the existing situation where we have only FDI by immediate counterpart country, no matter if it's inward or outward FDI. In the benchmark definition 4 in the OECD manual, the standard presentation is the directional principle based on the immediate counterpart country. So there is no doubt about it. The main reason, I suppose, is that information is easier to collect, and also because this ensures the link to the balance of payments, which is based on the immediate counterpart country. But still in BD4, it has been already foreseen the possibility to deliver on a voluntary basis, or the way they call the supplemental series. There is a data set requesting inward FDI positions by ultimate investing country. This is limited to positions, not to flows, and to the inward side. Again, because of reasons probably this is easier to collect than looking into the final host. But still, the ultimate host country is part of the BD4, but on the research agenda. Well, I have to say that at European level, our data collection is fully based on the directional principle according to the immediate counterpart country. But we have identified some countries in the European context that are able to even disseminate regularly this kind of information. For instance, we have the case of Austria. And some other countries have disseminated this kind of information, at least according to some research studies. Not regularly, but on research studies. This is the case of the Banque de France or the Bank of Finland. And we have the case of the US Bureau of Economic Analysis. They actually regularly publishes FDI by what they call ultimate beneficiary owner. But what is good is that they disseminate both by ultimate beneficiary owner and also by immediate counterpart country. So this allows us to present this kind of information, which is quite interesting to show how different it can be. So you have to well, this is the FDI positions in the US, 2013 data. And the blue bar shows the ultimate investing country, while the red one shows the immediate investing country. And you see that there are quite big differences, particularly for certain countries. I mean, we have the case of Luxembourg, of the Netherlands, also less extent Belgium, where, and Switzerland, where you can see that immediate counterpart country is much bigger than the ultimate one. So meaning that these countries are somehow used to settle down SPEs or conduits where the investment is actually passing by or passing through. We have the contrary case. We have countries where the ultimate investing country is bigger than the immediate. The main cases are Germany, for instance, or the rest of the world, actually, the United Kingdom. And also another important feature here is the fact that you can see that the United States itself appears in the chart as ultimate controlling country, so meaning that it's an investment that goes out and comes back to the US. So as I said, we have identified that there is a need for this kind of information because of the structure of multinational enterprises, that they have complex links, and obviously they try to optimize the results of the activity. And also we all know that in certain countries are well-placed like centers for setting special purpose entities that work as conduits for channeling funds or holding assets without any real investment in the country. So the traditional FDI statistics based on the immediate counterpart country are not telling all the story. And in the case of Europe, as I just presented, we are profiting from the fact that we have the EGR to provide at least some help in the identification of this ultimate host or investing country. So my last slide is somehow to show what could be the role of the Friends of the Chair on this in this issue. The idea is that this should be somehow part of the kind of work program that is going to be developed. And I see at least 4 issues on which this could be tackled. First of all, to provide guidelines for the compilation of this information, including best practices and recommendations. Certainly to promote the provision of this supplemental series to the OECD. I had discussed with my colleagues of the OECD before the summer about what the expectations for receiving this data, because now it's going to be the first data collection for this kind of information, and they told me that they do not expect to have many countries providing this information. So I think we should try to promote this at least as a first step towards this collection. Then we may need to set up priorities in terms of users' needs, because we may decide, okay, let's collect positions data, let's leave flows for next step. We focus on the inward side instead of the outward, so there are some priorities that may be decided. And also certainly a kind of coordination, ensuring coordination in these initiatives at international level and fostering cooperation. So that's it I wanted to present. I think I managed before the end. Okay, thank you.
We have time for a few questions. So I'll open the floor and perhaps take, say, 4 questions max. And if there are not 4 questions, then that means we can leave earlier. So the floor is open. Ron?
Thanks, Luis, for the presentations. Very nice. Yeah, I take the floor because I think that this is one of the areas which is important in the work program going forward. Especially how, and that's the question to you, Luis, how you would imagine that an enterprise group register could be broadened beyond the EU. Maybe as a setup to this question, you could indicate what different information you have about enterprise groups which are fully European and those where headquarters are elsewhere. So what's the level of information that you have of those which are not fully in Europe? And what as I said, what are your expectations of trying to see that we can expand, and how we would do this? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. Well, obviously, I mean, the problem of broadening this to countries beyond European Union is that we will come out with this potential problem of exchanging confidential data, and this is a big issue. As I explained in my presentation, the fact that we had a regulation allowing this was certainly very useful. But I think that the way to do that, if we can move forward, is at least to define some kind of variables or information, or different levels of variables of information, and see if some kind of aggregations or certain variables that do not represent a breach in this confidentiality could be exchanged. I mean, there are issues like the structure of the groups or some consolidated figures that are already available. I mean, the groups, the enterprise group, have to produce consolidated accounts. They have to disseminate information about the structure, about the composition of the groups, about the affiliates. So this kind of information is already available because they have obligations in terms of disseminating this information. So some levels of variables, or variables at a certain level, could be somehow exchanged. Obviously, as I said, we have 116 variables in the at the moment. Obviously, it's a dream that we will be able to go in that direction, but at some level, we could try to define certain variables that could be feasibly exchanged.
Fabienne?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up also on Ron's question, because that's, of course, you are creating this increasingly interesting and rich data set. And I think also, in a way, it's not even the variables that would be interesting for many countries outside Europe. It might just be the list of companies with an association of what is their headquarter country, for example, as established and approved among all the European statisticians, because that would help a lot in creating FATs, so inward and outward FATs, in many other countries around the world, and in that way it would be a kind of public good in a way to help and also to promote the reduction of asymmetries in this field as well. So I think that would be very very interesting. Thanks.
Well, I mean, certainly one of the variables that should make available is clearly this Global Decision Center, or the UCI as we call it as well. I mean, this is kind of information that I don't see it's harming in terms of dissemination. And it is fundamental because at the end of the day, I mean, FATs or FDI are somehow allocated according to the residency of these entities. So I think it's important.
Thank you. I have a question that is not exactly what you've been talking about, but I feel there is an issue that is not being touched, and I think it's fundamental to trade and globalization. And I don't understand where this issue fits in all you've been saying today. And it's the issue of technology. What is technology in this picture? Because, well, it's an element fundamental for trade. For developing countries, we ought to trade, we ought to have foreign investment in order to get technology and to benefit from the changes in technology. But not a word has been said about that. There is any reason whatsoever for that?
Well, perhaps I can answer the question, because it's not really aimed at anybody else unless you'd like to pick it up. I mean, the issue of technology is one that forms the broader strand of work in terms of looking at global value chains more generally. At the OECD, we're doing a lot of work on what we call knowledge-based assets, and we're trying to allocate the measurement of knowledge-based assets to specific sectors of the economy to understand better how knowledge-based assets are being used to improve productivity, but also as a mechanism to move into global value chains. And so the whole discussion, for example, about upgrading is usually driven around the notion that there is this technological process that drives part of that. The problem really is about the underlying data. And today we're talking about real challenges in terms of bringing data together and creating an integrated framework. But we know and we're aware that when we talk about capital and assets, it's even more murky. Just getting information on balance sheets of firms for, if you want, tangible assets is difficult enough. When we start delving into the subject of intangible assets, then it becomes really, really very complicated. I mean, within the accounting framework, we have a list of intangible assets that we recognize as being produced in the accounting framework, but there are many others, like, for example, organizational capital, that are not recognized as such in the accounting framework, and nor are they recorded on balance sheets of enterprises that we use in the accounting framework. So there is work that's ongoing, but I think it's probably premature at this stage to put it into a sort of a more comprehensive longer-term strategy. I think that I'm going to take the benefit now of just of being the chair to ask perhaps the final question. It's more of a question from a perspective of a devil's advocate, if you want. And I think the first question really is that within the EGR, there's an awful lot of information that can be produced. But when I looked at the paper, there was also quite a lot of information that I thought could also be produced using standard FATS data. And so it was difficult to see, I guess, exactly how much of a marginal benefit could be added on top of the FATS data. And the second question was really in the context of how we measure demographic events within an EGR. So, for example, you had a chart that showed employment growth by the ultimate, or the GDC, I think as you refer to it. But it wasn't clear to what extent you were able to differentiate between organic employment growth and indeed employment growth that may have come through from, say, mergers or acquisitions.
Well, for the second question, we cannot differentiate.
Okay.
So we cannot differentiate. So, and regarding the issue of the FATS, I mean, so far the EGR has been designed to be a tool for FATS statisticians and not the other way around. So this is actually the process we are now considering about how we can really exploit the information in the EGR to link to the activities of multinational enterprises in order to at least give some aggregated information. But this is the step we are now. So far, as I said, it has been more on the infrastructural side and not on the way to exploit it for further dissemination. But this is, as I said, is the approach we are trying to follow.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you to all the speakers. I'm only going to give a very brief summary, because I think that we've had a long discussion anyway. But I think that clearly what you've illustrated is there are things that we can do. There are many other things, of course, that we're going to have to reflect on in terms of trying to find the best way in which we can move forward. And I'm not going to say anything more than that, because it's 5:05 and I've gone 5 minutes over, for which I apologize. But I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you for the interesting discussions we've had during the day. And another round of applause, please, for the three presenters. I'm not sure if anybody from Energy wants to take the floor to say something about this evening's activities, but maybe that information is all already very clear.